removal. He's done about 16 of these surgeries, and they are absolutely phenomenal. We are going to get up close and personal with what these surgeries were and what Dr. Leir discovered when he took these implants out of human beings. What are we looking at here? I mean, I'm looking at, and I can see these like what appear to be implants. The skeptic's going to say, well, it's a BB gun or it's a wire from another operation. What are these objects we're looking at in the x-rays?
Well, I prefer really, Lynn, to take the skeptical point of view because I'm the one that's involved with it. So as far as I'm concerned, these are two cases in which there appears to be metallic foreign body. We don't know whether it's an implant or whether somebody picked up a flying nail. And these are two different cases. As you can see, this one appears to be in the joint, but it's really not. It's in probably soft tissue, is what we call a patellar tendon here. But this is an elongated object, and you can see it's metallic. And we know that it's metallic because in reference to the density of the bone, you can see that it's metal. This one here, these two cases, by the way, have not been done yet. These are pending surgeries that we'll do in the future. We use an x-ray device called a C-arm. And the C-arm is a live mobile unit, so that if you make an incision and you insert an instrument, you can see it as you're doing it. Wow. And it makes it a lot easier to locate the object and clamp it. Sometimes we found in doing these implant cases that the object moves.
I want to stop you there for a moment, because what you just said, I mean, you've traveled in this, you've witnessed it, but for the viewers who are listening to this for the first time, you just said the object moved. Can you clarify that the object moved away from you on its own power somehow? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. In these cases where you're dealing with a metallic object that's inside the body, you don't see anything from the outside with the naked eye. But when you insert an instrument in the tissue, most of the surgical instruments are stainless steel, and they're supposed to not have any kind of a magnetic field. But for whatever the reason, they seem to react with the magnetic field of the object, and it's as if two like ends of the magnet are towards each other, and the object gets propelled somewhere else. So we've seen this over and over and over again.
I want to get sort of the personal side of the story. When does a person, how do they first contact you and why? What is bothering that person that they would seek you out to begin with?
Well, they usually seek me out now. I mean, this is a drastic difference than when I started this, but we've done 16 surgeries today. So my name is known basically all over the world for doing this kind of research. But so when they come to me today, at today's date and time, they usually feel, number one, that they've been involved in the alien abduction phenomena, and that they have an object, or that they might have an object.
Okay.
What happened to you 20 years ago?
Oh, probably had a car accident, sighting. Learned quite a bit about God and the universe in a very short period of time. I feel to be a very fortunate man. And
Hi. Mike has been in on all these surgeries.
I truly understand the enormity of some of the statements I probably have made.
Yeah. Do you think that...
But I feel that... How do you put it? The truth will set you free, I guess. It's the only way you can look at it.
This was a patient who had one in the wrist. This came out of the wrist, and it's probably a piece that's left. This one you should be able to get in.
That's very big. Where did that come out of?
This one, if I remember correctly, was out of a forearm.
Now, is that in a blood type serum? Or
this is in, yeah, this is in the serum from the patient. we find that they seem to be quite happy as long as there's some preservative that's like the human body that it came out of.
I understand you've got some scientific data on the alien implants. Can you explain that to us, please?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that we do is we try and look at these objects from the outside in, so to speak. So when we've gotten the amount of data that we need to get from looking at the outside, then we go deeper into the object and try and get more data as we go through it. And one of the modalities for doing this is testing called an SEM and an EDX. And we're actually looking at one instrument, which is the scanning electron microscope.
SEM. Okay.
SEM. And the EDX is only a term for breaking it down to be quite simple, getting the definitive elements that the object is composed of. And for example, here you see that there are two very large peaks. And at the top of the peak, you see there's an FE. Well, an FE stands for iron. So we can tell that the most abundant element in these objects is the iron. So just from looking at that alone doesn't really mean anything. But when you go further through, some of the other graphs, if we were to come up, for example, where we're starting to see nickel in these graphs, and then the ratio of nickel, for example, to the amount of iron that's seen will give us a clue as to what kind of iron is this. I mean, is this something from Home Depot, or is this something from the Pleiades? So when we see a certain nickel-iron ratio in graphs just like this, we can say in most instances now that we know that it contains meteoric iron, because there's a specific nickel-iron ratio in meteorites. But one of the meteorites found on Earth, one category of meteorites, is a nickel-iron meteorite. Okay. The large meteorite strike in Arizona that created the huge crater was one of these nickel iron meteorites, and of course you can tell by digging through the fragments. So that's the elemental analysis, which is part of scanning electron microscopy. And the other thing, we can use it to take pictures. So we can look at a first few, maybe up to 10 nanometers, just below the surface. Or we can crank up the beam, so to speak, so you get a heavy bombardment of electrons, and we can start to take pictures that are 20 nanometers or 40 nanometers going down through the object.
What did the SEM show you that was anomalous regarding the implants?
We use the data and results, and we can see structures. Structures like carbon nanotubes. You can see this is a structure. And this happens to be a structure, we don't know what it is. So we find things down in the deep crevices of the metal on an atomic level, and they can be ovoids, they can be spheres, or they can have other shapes.
And these do not occur in nature, correct? These
do not occur in nature, and they don't really occur in the natural process of metallurgy that we use to put unlike metals together and form a compound metal, which we call an alloy. So if we find an alloy of aluminum and iron, it would not look like this. This is something else. Now this is a very interesting one because it shows a line going across here, which is a definitive boundary line. And this is kind of interesting because you don't find in usual metallurgy metallic boundaries such as it's showing
Any
here.
idea what that might be used for?
The only thing that we can come up with is that there were two dissimilar elements that were put together for a reason.
If a skeptic were to look at the evidence, specifically the implants and some of the work that you've done with these, how would they refute them? Metallurgy, which was done off this world, Would you say that this is sort of a smoking gun? Could you call it a smoke? I mean, let me ask, I guess where I'm going with this is there any possible way that our government could create the nanotubes found in these implants, in your opinion?
I personally consider skeptics psychics. I tell them, I say, well, you seem to know everything that there is to know about what I'm talking about or somebody else is talking about, but you never look at the data. So therefore, you must be psychic. So that's in reference to skeptics. Now, in reference to the rest of the question, the smoking gun. Yeah, I would say this is pretty much of a smoking gun. We do know, as I stated before, that black budget science is way, way ahead of academic science. But I tend to doubt, just on a personal basis from what I've seen, that they know how to do all these kind of things. Let's give an example. Let's say if they back-engineered alien craft starting from 1947, which may have been crashes before 1947, but this one seemed to have a lot of attention. If they back-engineer that and we have a fleet of these craft that we've learned to fly and are flying around them, you know, we've had 60-some odd years to do that with. But does that mean that they understand the totality of what they back-engineered? I would, you know, take probably the best scientists, the best physicists that the world is able to buy and bet against it. It takes time for a society, even with hints, to grow to the point where you're able to use everything that an advanced society that's perhaps thousands or millions of years older, how could we catch up in 60 years or 100 years? So it's not logical. So when you say, yes, this is a smoking gun, it's a smoking gun from the standpoint of academic science. Here we have something you can put your finger on, you can look at it through a microscope, feel it, touch it, test it, and it doesn't come from here.
Fascinating. On a personal level, fear, are they elated that they're removed? Just tell us about, on a personal level, what these people go through.
Well, most abductees are in a constant battle with themselves as to the reality of the situation. Many abductees would rather be diagnosed with a specific mental disease, which could be treatable, than to say I am the victim of somebody coming here from some society somewhere else and taking me against my will for some unknown reason and then doing something with my body. So, on the other hand, when they wake up in the morning and they've got a mark that wasn't on their body the night before, or they wake up and they have the feelings of the flu, with muscle aches and pains, extremely thirsty, vivid memories of something that went on, or they wake up and they're not wearing the bedclothes that they went to bed with, then they are in a situation where they begin to wonder, was this a dream or is it a reality? And that begins to carry through. So in most abductees, and I've studied now hundreds, if not thousands of cases, this battle will continue beyond that of a metallic or non-metallic object that's in the body. One of the things that when they come to the realization that we have an x-ray of an object that was in my body that wasn't there the night before, it tends to push them towards the reality that, yes, this is a real phenomenon. It's occurring to me, you know, in our real 3D world, not in a dream or some semi-quasi delusional dream state. So then they accept the reality, and then they have to decide whether they want to keep it or whether they want it out. So naturally, all the patients that we've done the removals on, have wanted it out.
In your opinion, what do you think that these implants are doing? Are they perhaps changing the very DNA structure of an individual, or maybe they're tracking devices? What do you think about that?
I'm fairly well convinced that they are not tracking devices, and this is based on several interviews I've done with abductees that have had objects that did not want them removed. One was a case in Brazil who had 2 objects in a toe, but she chose not to have it removed. I lost touch with her, and I really don't know what happened. But she told me in discussing what these objects did, I said, well, you think it could be a tracking device? And she just laughed. I mean, she just gave me the horse laugh. And I said, well, why do you think that's so funny? She said, well, let me tell you. There was an episode with ETs in which they stopped a bug in mid-flight right in front of her in some kind of a beam of light or beam of energy. And they told her that they had the ability to track the DNA of that bug anywhere on this planet. So she said, do you think it's really necessary to have a device to do that? Well, that was some years before we, geneticists, earthly geneticists, realized that each one of our DNA strands has its own electrical configuration. So if we were smart enough, and maybe someday we will be smart enough, all we have to do is build a receiver. If we build a receiver for your DNA, I could track you anywhere. So an advanced civilization using an artificial device to track you, I don't believe this makes any sense whatsoever. So what do these things do? Some think they could be behavior modification devices. I really came up with a pet theory. I think that since most abductions involve the taking of ova and sperm, that it's pretty safe to say there's some genetic effect that's going on. Now, Dr. David Jacobs thinks they're making hybrid beings to perhaps repopulate the planet in case some disastrous event occurs, or maybe for some other reason. I'm not saying he's wrong. There very well could be a plan to develop hybrids, and maybe there's hybrids among us. But I think that the spectra of the phenomena is so worldwide and involves so many people all over the planet, I don't think that's the main objective of the group who's doing the most of the abductions. I think that it's more logical to me that they're doing something with our genetics, which they've probably done before. Because if you especially would know, if you look into the biblical history, there's things in the Bible that have all kinds of indications that people have been changed from time to time. Going back all the way to the story of the Tower of Babel. We build the tower, it goes up, God doesn't like it, and what does he do?
Confuses everyone's language.
He confuses the language. Well, what's the converse of that? If he confuses the language so that you can't communicate, and there were, some extensive geographical areas which had to develop, as we did, our own language, then how did we communicate before? But there are people that I have met personally that if there is such a thing as a hybrid, they sure fill the bill.
How would you describe that, elaborate on that for us?
Well, I can give you a classic example. I did last year, I think it was the Bay Area UFO Expo, and a tall fellow with sparse blonde hair came up and was sort of listening to one of our conversations and seemed to be very interested and so on, and one of the members of our group struck up a conversation with him, and in the course of the conversation he was asked, where do you come from? He said, well, I came from a long way to this conference to hear what you researchers have had to say. And it's, well, how far did you come? Well, I came from Colorado. And yeah, well, that's really great. What do you do? Well, I'm a computer, electronics engineer. I work with the computers. And he was asked, he said, well, I guess you're probably a really good skier. And he said, a what? Skiing. Don't you go skiing? And he said, what's skiing?
Whoa.
Well, I think to myself many times, what would it take to convince the masses? Because it would have to, you know, if President Obama came out on national television and said, you know, ladies and gentlemen, I have something to tell you. This is one of the most important things that's happened to mankind. We now know that there are extrasolar planets that have life forms like us, and not only that, but we've learned that they are and have been visiting here for many, many years. You know, I would predict that the following thing would happen: would people, you know, turn the dial and find out what the score on the Lakers game is, or a craft, for example, you know, mass. Talking about mass. A craft comes down, lands at rush hour time in the middle of a Hollywood freeway. You know, talk about panic. Yeah, I think there really would be a panic, because people would be right away on their cell phones calling some division of the state, Caltrans, to find out when they were going to get it out of there so that they could get home, you know, to watch the Rams. Yeah, that would be the panic.
That's it.
So people are so entrenched in their daily activities. Okay, well, that's nice. We're being visited by non-terrestrials, but you know, I still got to get up and go to work in the morning, and I'm lucky to have a job because, you know, etc. So what would it take to really, you know, show mankind that the most important thing in history is going on? Better than the president, I think, if Walter Cronkite was alive and he came out on television, he'd have a better chance of convincing anybody than anybody else I know. So maybe it's only going to come if there is some kind of a mass, you know, 1939 type landing, non-hostile, you know, landing with people, you know, constantly looking up. People never look up. They look down. Or they look straight ahead. They don't look up. You know, you have people, planes